Welcome to another episode of the Baseball Awakening Podcast, where we dive into the raw, unfiltered, unsexy side of player development. Get ready for some knowledge bombs with your host, Geoff Rottmayer.
Welcome to the Baseball Awakening Podcast. I'm Geoff Rottmayer. Today we're sitting down with the co-founder of Super Speed Slugger, Mike Napoleon. Mike, how are you, sir?
I'm doing great. How are you?
I'm doing great. Mike, I appreciate you coming on and sharing with our listeners. Just so everybody knows, you are the co-founder of Super Speed Slugger. So very curious to hear a little bit from you today. So why don't we just kind of start with, a little bit about who you are and maybe your background, and then how you got into Super Speed Slugger.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, first of all, I'm actually a golf coach by trade, so don't hold that against me. No. But we actually owned a pretty high performance golf academy business back in Chicago for about 10 years. During that time, we were a business where we were, helping people with their golf game to, kind of optimize and get better and have really efficient training programs, both on the coaching side, the fitness side, rehabilitation, all of that. That was a really cool environment to be in because we had all the great technology, like your 3D motion capture systems, ground reaction force systems, launch monitors, all the stuff that, for our world in golf has now become very mainstream, and I would say definitely is becoming much more popular in the baseball community in the last couple of years. So during that time, I met a baseball coach who was running a baseball academy of his own in Chicago as well, named Justin Stone. He actually now also consults and coaches for the Chicago Cubs. But one of the great things that was happening there is he was actually sending his baseball players in. This is back in like 2010, sending his baseball players in to go through 3D motion capture analysis and physical screening, a number of those different things that we did with all of our golf clients. He was sending his baseball players in to have those same things done at our facility, and then we were sending back reports and things back and forth to Justin for him to be able to more closely coach his players. One of the types of training that we kind of came across during this entire process was something called overload underload training, which, in the baseball world, I think has been something that's been done for a significant amount of time. In the golf world, it never had. So we looked into that and started doing a lot of research on what was actually happening with players and how they were gaining speed with that sort of training. We actually changed the name of it in the golf world to something we call overspeed training now, which we do find to be a little more descriptive of the actual science of it. So then we launched a golf system called Super Speed Golf to help golfers hit the ball further. And then about 2 years after that, we started developing our baseball products for hitting to help players increase bat speed, and that's kind of how Super Speed Slugger came about. Very cool.
So how did can you kind of talk about the process of how you came up with the weight and what you found there in terms of with the data that you guys were able to populate?
Yeah, absolutely. So what we found was that in general, traditional overload underload training was focusing far too much on the heavy side of the training. We found much better results with our players, both on the golf side and in all the studies we've done in baseball now, where the real piece of the importance is that we're making the player move faster than they normally do during the motion that they already know how to make. So, we're not trying to change the way a player hits a baseball or makes that swing. We're just trying to make their body move faster during that motion. So the side of it that's really important is you have to use the lighter weight implements in order to make the body move faster. And what happens in just a handful of swings there is that your brain starts to remember and expect that faster motion to come from the body. So then you can actually increase weight back, and you can see big jumps in bat speed. So that was kind of one of the big ones. When we found that most of the stuff out there was using 20-30% heavier bats in this training, we found that to be almost negate most of the gains that a lot of these players were getting during the training. So putting a system out there where we had that much lighter weight type motion, and ours are about 20% lighter, one's 10% lighter, and one's only about 5% heavier than the player's game bat. But we found that to be kind of the optimal breakdown of the weights with what we were looking at for this training. And once we started putting that into play, we started seeing just huge gains in bat speed right away. I think most of Justin's studies that he's done have averaged between 6.5% and 7% increased bat speed in 6 weeks of training, which is pretty wild. Steve Johnson, who's another partner of ours that also works with the On Base U team that we've been partnered with forever with TPI on the golf side. He owns a huge baseball academy in Alexandria, Virginia. He did a study and also added in some other like prep work to it and was actually getting 9-10% gains in bat speed in like a 2-month period. So some pretty big stuff is available on this stuff for players. And I mean, there's really no downside in baseball to increasing bat speed.
Right. So, just for the people that are listening, you mentioned that Steve was doing some prep work. Can you talk a little bit about what prep work is, just so people who are listening understands?
Yeah, so I look at the way we do this training. There's kind of like good, better, and best, right? Like what we have on the website right now, if you go to superspeedslugger.com and you buy our system and then you go through the training protocols that are on there, you can do that by itself, and we'll see an average of about a 5 to 6% gain in bat speed in 6 weeks. And that process that we propose to everyone out there, regardless of your situation, involves going through a warm-up process and then going through the actual speed training protocols that we've built. What Steve did, which was really cool, is he added in a step in the middle there. So he had the player warm up. Then he did a preparation phase that was something we call overload training. So this is going to be like some lifting heavy weights, like ballistic type, gym type work, in order to just activate more motor units in the body, get more muscle activation going. And then immediately after that, had the players go through the overspeed training, speed training portion. And that middle step, at least in theory, we don't have enough research on it to prove it yet, but we're theorizing that adding that little overload kind of heavy workout type piece right before the overspeed training, if done in the right way, could even optimize the results further.
Very cool. So the protocol that you came up with, how did you guys, what was the process that went into figuring out which would be the most efficient drills to do?
Yeah, so lots of different things there. Obviously, most of the research on that stuff came in on our golf products because those came out first.
Sure.
But we found we knew there were a few things that were really acting really well in this thing. So we were looking at what are the underlying pieces that really do affect speed and power in every single motion that happens? Because we know that this neurological component of just getting the brain to expect a faster response is definitely something that's going to help everybody. Right. But we found that we created this model we call the speed pyramid, which basically ties together, how the player interacts with the ground. So that's all of your ground reaction, force, pressure, how they push, and how they interact with the ground. Right? Then we look at rotational sequencing and kinematics. So this is basically the way that player sequences, which segments of their body move first. How do we see if the biomechanics are efficient? And then how that ties into their hands and arms and the bat, and how they're actually applying that speed to the actual swing to the ball. Right.
Right.
So that speed pyramid model was something that we looked at in our protocols to find ways to put drills in that would work on all of those areas, without really ever telling the player that we were working on any of that really complex stuff, right? So, great sequencing drills like our step and hit kind of drills. We also do some more advanced like biomechanics drills like the stuff we do with kneeling swings. I think the other big piece is that we have non-dominant training in every one of our protocols. So players swing both on their dominant side and non-dominant side. That's a huge thing that's been proven to show big results in your sequencing gains. But again, from a coaching standpoint, I don't want to have to tell players all this complicated stuff about what they're doing. I just want to say, do this drill. It's really simple. And then knowing that there's a lot of result that can come from just going through that process.
Very cool. So can you talk a little bit about you said that the non-dominant side training showed a huge gain in the kinematics in the sequence. Can you talk a little bit about that a little bit?
Yeah, absolutely. So there's two really, I would say, well, there's more than two, but two really important areas that we look at in the kinematic sequence of a player as far as directly relating to that player's speed and power output. The first one is going to be, as the segments transition, how fast they can transition, what type of acceleration numbers we see when those different segments come out of the gate. So that's number one. The second one, though, that sometimes is even more important, is how aggressively those segments can stabilize or decelerate in the biomechanics term. But basically, it's like we want to see a fast acceleration of the segments, then we want to see like an immediate stop, like stabilization as that rotational speed goes up the chain to the next segments. Well, one of the things we find with non-dominant training is getting the opposite side of the body, getting the muscles activated, getting them a little bit more coordinated, tends to help with that stability chain, that stabilization chain in a major way. And you actually know, you've seen this happen without even knowing about it before. Like if you go through the stats and the majors for a long time, with switch hitters, especially forever, like it always seems that when you look at those numbers, and there's an exception I'm sure we can find,
sure,
but in general, like switch hitters tend to be more powerful, hit for more power on their non-dominant side, and tend to have slightly higher average hitting on their dominant side. And it just has to do with that stability chain of those muscles. When they're swinging on their non-dominant side, they're essentially landing into the dominant side of their body, so that gives them a slight biomechanical advantage when it comes to power.
Very, very cool. So let's talk about the younger kid that don't know how to move well or don't know where they're supposed to generate power from. How would they utilize a program like this? Is there a certain age that you guys recommend with, so that we're not further creating more issues with their swing?
Absolutely. So our youngest set that we have is our what we call our youth set, and that's going to be targeted kind of at like your U11, U12 players. Okay. Honestly, like I'd recommend people start doing this even sooner than that. And we're looking in development of creating stuff for even younger kids. Cause honestly, like when kids are young, like 5 to 7 is about that's kind of like the gold time in their life to be able to develop like high levels potential for speed and power. I think on a coaching side, sometimes we get some things backwards. Sometimes we look at like overcoaching skill and mechanics in those younger ages,
right,
when really, like, if you look at professional athletes, regardless of sport, like the ones that train speed and that stuff early are the ones that tend to become elite athletes later.
Right.
But, to kind of go straight to your comment there about like mechanical efficiency, if you will, like, improving the mechanics of the motion. Well, I would look at it this way. You can backwards engineer working on efficiency without ever talking about style or the exact specific mechanics. So if a player is able to increase how fast they're making the bat move by, let's say, 5-6 miles an hour, something had to improve in the efficiency of their body motion in order to make that happen. Like it's impossible to actually increase that overall mechanical efficiency of the motion and actually get, I would say, worse with mechanics. Now, granted, that does, I still think it's very important that players are still working on mechanics while they're doing speed training.
Sure.
But as far as it being something that can directly hurt somebody's ability, we do not see that at all. We see positive improvements in the overall efficiency of their motion.
Yeah. So whenever they're going through the program, we're telling them to just swing as hard as you can, right? Just not even really worried about the swing. Really, we're just telling them, hey, just swing the bat as hard as you can.
I mean, honestly, as a coach, I tell players all the time not to worry about exactly how they're doing a motion. I think that gets in people's way more than it helps.
Yeah. I
think when you can look at that end result goal, right? Like, look, let's take a real example here. Like, you have a player coming in. Let's say it's a younger player. Their bat speed's 45 miles an hour, right?
Right.
So now, if you start to coach that player and try to get them into 4 or 5 different positions during that, every time you're going to see that 45 miles an hour probably go down. However, if you give them a little radar device and you say, look, what I want to see is how can you make that speed go up to 50 miles an hour? What ends up happening there is, let's say one of them, they tense up, they swing really hard, and it goes down to 40. Well, they just learned that feeling, that tensing up and that swinging hard feeling made their speed go down. Yeah. Whereas the next one, where they kind of just happen upon or discover that sort of feel of like increasing sequencing. Maybe it was that they weren't leading with their lower body right. Maybe it was a ground reaction thing. They weren't pushing as well in the like loading phase into moving forward, whatever it might have been. They're going to discover this feel, and all of a sudden that number went up to 48. Now they just learned that feel increases the speed of their swing. So that's kind of where I'm going with that. That discovery learning aspect, especially for kids, is far more effective from a coaching strategy than standing in there and putting them into 15 different positions and basically making them so mad they want to hit you with the bat.
Right. So having the radar there is going to be kind of almost as important as anything else, so that they could see that and make the adjustment.
I think it's an incredibly good feedback tool. I really do think it's something that makes a big positive impact on the training. Yeah. However, you can do it without that too. Like, you can also, listen to the sound the bat's making, like, the whoosh sound that bat's making when you make the training. You can make that louder. So there are other ways to do it without the radar. But yes, it does make a big difference. I would say, especially with the kids.
Yeah, and so, for the people that are listening, that we're talking about developing like speed and power. We're not talking about the skill stuff, but for the crowd that says you got to go slow before you go fast, what would you say to that crowd?
I'd say it's just old theory that is not proven and doesn't work. I mean, you really just look. Let's put it this way: when coaching wise, just from a motor learning standpoint, from a how people learn standpoint, it's fine to show somebody in a slow kind of environment when the player doesn't even understand what they're trying to do. But, and this is probably one of the most researched thing in academic literature, motor learning, of anything that's out there. What research shows there is that as soon as the player understands the concept, has a general feel of what it feels like to make a successful rep of a drill, they should be doing that at game speed to maximize the learning process.
Right.
So I think your concept of go slow before fast may have some validity in the standpoint of if somebody doesn't have any knowledge or feel of what they're trying to do, then sure, they need to learn what it feels like to accomplish the task. But as soon as they know that feel, then you got to get them into game speed as fast as possible to maximize their learning.
Right. So the you guys have a particular design for the Super Speed Slugger bats. Is there a specific reason why it's designed the way it is, or is that just the way you all came up with it?
The primary one is that we don't want people to hit baseballs during the training. So we tried to make it look as little like, something that you'd want to hit a baseball with as possible, even though, and I won't name names, but I mean, I can't tell you how many calls I've gotten. They're like, man, this thing just got bent to shit. And I'm like, well, what were you doing? Like, well, we had it in the cage for like a half hour. I'm like, oh man, did you guys watch the video? So using it properly is obviously important. Yeah. But yes, we've actually done studies on that. So we find that we get much bigger speed gains by doing the speed training all with dry swings and then going back in the cage and applying it to actually hitting baseballs after. If we do it while we're trying to hit a baseball, it makes sense when you think about it. If you got a baseball flying at you at 80 miles an hour, like, your goal is to hit the baseball. It's very hard, especially for a higher level player, to do something significantly different in that moment when they're also trying to hit the baseball. So think about it as a separate module. Make them do something different, faster, more efficient, then apply that to actually hitting the baseball.
Makes sense. So how often would you recommend someone doing the protocol? Is it an everyday thing, and how long do they maybe take?
Yeah, we've found optimal is 3 days a week with a full day off in between. That we actually find that people do it every day. They have a harder time maintaining maximum intensity on every rep in the drill, so you actually get a little bit less efficiency in the training. And that's the big thing. They're not long training protocols. Like the training protocols take like 5 to 8 minutes to go through. It's just 5 to 8 minutes of pretty intense activity. So, I mean, it is tiring in that amount of time. But the goal is really to max out every one of those reps that you do. But I believe our level 1 protocol is like 39 swings with about half of them being on the non-dominant side.
So how many different levels are there?
We have 3 levels on the baseball side.
Okay.
We are in development right now. I'm working on a couple others. On the golf side, we actually have 5 levels now. Again, that product's been out for a little bit longer. The baseball ones, we would release some more. It's just the baseball stuff with the bats being heavier actually tend to be a little bit more taxing on the players than the golf clubs that are a little bit lighter. So we've found that we can't get quite to the same level of volume and still maintain the training efficiency. So those 3 protocols, though, like can really take somebody through years worth of this training. It's not like you need a lot of different things to go in there. The level 1 kind of gets people going with it. The level 2 adds in the kneeling swings, which we think are a major improvement for a lot of the biomechanics stuff. And then the level 3 kind of puts all that together with a little bit more volume. But yeah, I mean, we have players who've been doing this for a couple of years now. They're doing fine. They're plenty taxed after doing the level 3 protocol.
Yeah, Mike, with the overload training being a trendy thing right now in the baseball world, can you go a little bit deeper? And you talked about this a little bit, but can you go a little bit deeper into your guys' finding on the heavier side, not producing the result that you guys were wanting or shooting for?
Yeah, so I think that's been the kind of tradition in baseball, especially, is that, I'm going to swing something heavy and it's going to make my bat feel lighter, and then I'm going to be able to move that faster. Well, I mean, we've just seen this not work in many different studies now. In fact, we did one probably 5 years ago, or our friends at TPI did, with some collegiate players, minor league players. They had them actually do a warm-up with like a donut that was adding 20% or so to the weight of the bat. So I had them go through a warm-up with only like 10 swings with that. And they actually found that on average, players lost around 25 to 30% of their normal bat speed right after that. It took them to the 5th swing after doing that to get back to their normal bat speed. So that seemed kind of wild to me when I heard that one. But it makes sense when you think about the, I would say, how your brain's controlling your body, right? Like our overspeed training products, we're moving the body faster, allowing your brain to sort of remember that your body's reacting faster and increasing speed. Well, the opposite side of that spectrum works too. If you swing something a lot heavier, your brain starts to remember this slower sequence, slower motion of your body because there's more resistance. You can't move it as fast. So let's say your bat speed goes down by 10% or something with that heavier weighted bat. When you go back to your game bat, your brain's now remembering and expecting that slower reaction speed, not the faster one. Now, like I was mentioning with Steve's study, there is something to be said for overload training, which is going to use heavier weighted objects and increase motor activation for the player, motor unit activation. However, what we're finding is that it's better to do that type of training away from the specific motor program of the swing, so we don't get that neurological effect of expecting this slower response. Do the speed, the weight training, the heavier weighted training with more explosive movements. Do it with a medicine ball, or do it, with squats or jumps or whatever it might be that you're going to do that type of activation training, and then do the lightweight over speed training, motor program specific to the swing. So again, I don't think it's necessarily wrong to use heavier weights. I just would never want someone to do that in the actual motion they're making during practice for like swinging and trying to hit a baseball. I'd rather them do that away from that, in the gym, activate all the motor units in their body, and then neurologically get the brain to remember this faster speed that they can do doing the lightweight stuff in the training.
Right, that makes sense. So what about a guy that's coming back from an injury? What that conversation like for a program like this?
Yeah, we actually have used especially our golf product, we've used a lot in the rehabilitation process for players. This is kind of how that would work. So the point in the swing when you're in the cage hitting a baseball, the point where the most like residual force goes through your body and can cause the most amount of damage is actually when you hit the ball. So it's that point where you make contact, right? That's where if things are going to get injured or broken, that's where it's going to happen, because that's where the most force is going through your body. So because we don't actually hit balls with our training, once a player would be medically cleared, so like once the doctors know that by making the motion, they're no longer going to re-injure whatever the problem was, there's usually like kind of a hump there of just like the player being scared they're going to hurt themselves that you got to get over to be able to get them back to their normal like game speed. So we've found that putting our training in at that point where there is no impact, so it's much less taxing on the body in that regard than actually being in the cage hitting baseballs. It's a great point where we can start to get that player used to getting some speed and power back going through their body with a little bit in a little safer environment before they would actually be back in applying it to really hitting baseballs.
Makes sense. So Mike, if you were me interviewing yourself, what would you have asked or even brought up that I didn't bring up or ask?
Yeah, I mean, I think we covered most of all the really big points there.
Yeah.
You know, the only thing I would say is that I think it's important to look at this type of training and speed training in general as a part of an overall program. Like, we're not trying to claim that by just picking up our Super Speed Slugger system, it's going to make everything in the world of your baseball performance better.
Sure.
But it's one aspect that can significantly affect your speed and power performance. But putting that into an overall training program where you're working on the physical side of, stability, strength, power, all of those aspects in the gym, and then also having a good, set for working on, the different skill elements that are important to the sport. I think putting it in that overall program is a really important factor to optimize what you're going to get out of all of this.
Very cool. So one other question I just thought about. What about would people see like a result in? Not only do you see the results in like the radar, but will they see the difference in like their blast motion or their kinematics or whatever sensors they have?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, whatever you're swinging, if it measures how fast that bat's moving, you're going to see a change.
Yep, and obviously the KVET numbers are all going to look better as well. Rotational speed.
Absolutely. Like KVES, you're going to see on average probably a 15 to 20% increased rotational velocity in like the pelvis torso usually. Hand rotational velocity usually goes up by about 6 to 8%.
And then with everything else going up, the exit speed will likely go up as well.
Yeah, so I mean, exit velo is going to go up. Now, granted, that still means that player's making solid contact with the ball. So, there are we talk about bat speed. I know that's not as much of a common term as exit velocity, just because it takes some variables out, right? Like, I know I can help somebody increase the bat speed. Now, the skill of still making sure they hit the center of the barrel every time, we don't see it to be a huge issue for players, but obviously if they don't, you couldn't guarantee that it was going to increase the exit velocity.
Yeah, so with all the data that you guys have captured over the years, both on the golf and the baseball side, from a data point of view, how similar are the movements?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, they're extremely similar from a biomechanics standpoint as far as exactly how speed and energy are being created and transferring throughout the player's body. I would say that it's extremely similar. Yeah. Obviously, from a skill standpoint, there are some differences.
Sure.
Mechanically, there are a handful of differences that are extremely important, mainly as a result of the fact that, baseball's flying in thigh high versus like, a golf ball being sitting on the ground. So that does change some things about, posture angles and the, plane of the swing and all of those sort of aspects. But, in a very raw sense, the motions are extremely similar biomechanically as far as how players create power. It's one of the reasons you see, a lot of, if you got a power hitter in baseball, they could probably hit a golf ball pretty far too.
Very cool. Well, Mike, if people wanted to learn more, what's the website and what's the process to getting started?
Yeah, absolutely. Superspeedslugger.com. Just go on there. All of the training is actually open and free to the public. So just go ahead and, look at all the training videos. There's a bunch more information up there from a lot of industry experts about how all the science works. Check that out. And then, all you need to do the training is the product. So you just get the product and you start doing the training as we have instructed on the website. There's also tons of information on our Super Speed Golf website. So that's superspeedgolf.com. We probably have even more interviews, podcasts, radio shows, everything else you can imagine there if you want to learn more about the science on the golf side. We actually have tennis products now too, superspeedtennis.com. So, obviously we're kind of involved in helping people in all different sports get faster. But yeah, I mean, baseball specific, superspeedslugger.com.
All right. Well, very good, Mike. I think we covered a lot. Cool stuff you got there, it looks like.
Yeah, thanks a lot for having me on. If there's anything else we can do in the future, please let us know. We always love spreading the word on helping people hit the ball further.
All right, man. I appreciate it.